Hello. Oneness evolving here, out in my garden, on a fairly cold spring day. Just starting gently into a Facebook Live, which means I've got to wait for it to go up to the cloud and go over to some server somewhere on the planet and go somewhere else and show up on my husband's feed so he can share it out. So that's why I'm not talking about manifestation yet. Right now, I'm out here showing you that spring is coming. In fact, spring honestly is here. Look, this deciduous thing is coming up with things that you can't see because they're blurry. There you are. And it's just sprouting all over the place. And I love this plant because it makes beautiful, beautiful flowers. Getting out of the garden here. And there's little geraniums. Well, they're not geraniums, are they? See, this is the Lotus Lake Pelargonium, and it's coming up for flower. And look at the violets. There are violet flowers. And just take a moment to enjoy the lichen on this stick. And we've got cineraria coming up everywhere, and I don't mind because this bed is kind of in between things. It's a bit of a mess. And the cineraria fill the gaps, and everything needs weeding. And the little roses are sprouting. And oh look, the Spiraxis are beginning. Just the first few flowers are coming out. They're not actually open because it's cold today. But look. So you can see this bed is starting to happen. But for now, the thing that's most spectacular, even though it's got a weed growing in it, which I am actually going to try to pull out while you look at the beautiful fuchsias. Fuchsias, what am I saying? Freesias. Here we are, I finally found the stem of the weed. Out it comes. Just look at these. Aren't they fabulous? Freesias are definitely one of the first things to flower in spring. Look at this one, it's bigger and it's whiter. And it's just beautiful. I love these flowers. And I love being able to share them with you. And they've hybridized because over in the other bed, there are some golden ones, and the bees don't care about the nectar and the pollen. They just move around. And so I have yellow freesias and I have white ones, and aren't they fabulous? I just enjoy this beautiful display. So, that's the freesias. Let me show you a little bit more. We have here my favourite, really. Look at these pompon violets. And they smell so good. You have to imagine the scent. Look how gently, how many flowers they make. I just love this plant. It's beautiful. And the scent, it just wafts up. You know, obviously I'm down on my hunkers near the ground, but it's beautiful here. Something that these big cinerarias, look, they're all coming up into flower, are hiding, is this thing. Because I planted the cinerarias in the wrong place, but there's a bush here which has the most beautiful pure white flowers, and it's all coming out as well. There's another one back there. I'll put the cinerarias in a different place next to you. But look at this, bright purple. They're so colourful. And the huge fern in the back. And very definitely, we have magnolias now. So this magnolia tree is just starting its fabulousness. You can see how many flower buds there are, and it's just starting to wake up and come into bloom. And these are the things that I transplanted a couple of weeks ago, and they will get tall. They're called rue or thalictrum, and here's a bunch of more violets that I moved, and they're starting to look like they live here now. And here's a bit that I missed, but it's connected to the ground in another way, so it'll be alright. So everything is coming up. We've even got the first bluebells coming into flower, and that's always nice to see. So bluebells, and this iris, I think I'm finally going to see this iris flower again after probably 15 years. It's been miserable all this time, and see that's a flower head. I know, that'll be a flower in however many weeks. It's fabulous to see it. So everything is starting to sprout. The roses too. I love fresh rose foliage. And It's all happening in here. And look at these. The fuchsia just keeps on going. It's fabulous. So this is the spring garden. The dogtooth violets are coming up and they will have little yellow flowers soon. I know they don't look terribly spectacular at the moment, but I'm pretty pleased that they're there because they've been sort of smothered for years and years. So this year they'll get bigger and next year they'll be really something. So now I'm going to go inside and tell you what I've been writing about this week. Because every week I carve out one Wednesday morning, might be Tuesday where you are, but it's Wednesday here, and I write. And what I'm writing about is this business of being God of me, being my own boss, mastering my life. And that's not as obvious as you might think, because being your own boss actually means you've got to be free, and to be free you have to have enough resources to be able to make choices that you want to make and, do the things you want to do. And many of us, including me, have struggled or do struggle with not having enough resources, not having the right people in our lives, and not actually being in the right place in our world. Whatever. There are so many things that we think, I'm free, I'm in charge of my life, but are we? And I've spent the last year, really, writing about how we actually become addicted to negative emotions and how that works. I really wanted to explain simply, but fairly completely, how it is we get addicted to being miserable, because we do. And I have finally finished that. I could revise it endlessly. I could go back over it. Every time I look at something, it's like, I want to change that. But anyway, the point being that last week I wrote about a thing called the emotional refractory period. And that is what you see when somebody loses their rag. For example, they fly off the handle, they lose their temper, they get very angry, and they do dumb things. I have talked about the fact that when we go into a strong survival emotional feeling, we lose our mind. But I realised when I was sort of summarising everything I've written to date that I wanted to explain the emotional refractory period better. And truly, that refractory period is the period of time that it takes for us to go blah about whatever. And then, of course, we have a strong reaction, which means there's a high level of chemicals in our body, emotional chemicals. And so those chemicals hang around and they give us a feeling. And however long it is for us that it takes for us to get over that feeling and stop feeling it, that's the emotional refractory period. It's however long those chemicals persist. Now, in the case of anger, for example, if you have a flash of anger, if you get really angry about something, and if you express it properly, and obviously that doesn't mean killing somebody or breaking things or whatever, but if you can express it appropriately, that anger should be gone in a minute or 3 or maybe 5. But there are people who can be angry all day. They are stuck in a refractory period. They never get out of it. And what you've got to understand about people when they're in an emotional refractory period, and by the way, you can be in a positive emotional refractory period. You can be so in love that all you see in the person that you're in love with is their good points, and that's great, unless you're so completely out of your mind with being in love that you do dumb things, make big decisions that you then later regret. So anyway, I finished off the emotional refractory period. I put that piece of writing correct into the right place in the context of everything else I've written, and then I updated the summaries that I've done of all the little module pieces, and I thought, right, draw a line in the sand, and I've filed that in a folder called Why Is It So Hard to Change? Because that was a question I didn't even know to ask for 50 years in my life. And when I did start understanding why it's so hard for us to change from feeling bad to feeling good, because it seems to be really easy to go from feeling good to feeling bad, but it's so darn hard to go the other way. Once I started to understand that, it was like, oh, okay, I get this. I've actually got to change something in my body, and I might have taught my body to feel bad for a long time before I start to think that I need to teach it to feel something else. And that's why it's so hard. And I've written about and explained all of that, I think, in about the last year. Because I don't know when I started. I didn't keep track. Now, there's just this blank slate. And I have been, if you've been listening to these for the last week or two, you'll know that I've been saying, gee, I'm not sure what I'm going to write about next. But I know that if I sit with any question for long enough, I'm going to find an answer. And sure enough, an answer arrived. And the answer that arrived was this question. This is my next big question to answer, right? If the last question that I answered was, why is it so hard to change? The next question that I'm going to attempt to answer is, how does manifestation work? How? As in, really, how? And I don't mean, oh, you think this way and you get all positive and all of that's important. But really, how? Because I've understood for more than 5 years, or been learning for more than 5 years from Dr. Joe Dispenza about how you need a clear intention of what you want, and that's often much harder than you think, to have a really clear intention, because there's so much clutter in our heads and so many things we think we want that we don't actually want. And you've also got to have an elevated emotion, a strong feeling of how it would feel if you have that. And again, that can be really challenging, because if you are feeling so miserable that you don't have that thing that you want, it's really hard to take that miserable feeling of I don't have it and make it, oh man, it feels wonderful that I do. So I understood that, but I still, and by the way, there's no problem with that. It works. And Dr. Dispenza and his team, bless them, I love them, I participated. I do this every day. I apply that formula and it works and it changes me. But what's happened is that all the time in my mind I was still thinking, but how? And he's asking the same question, by the way. How does this actually happen? And they're measuring and they're finding the chemistry and they're working with really clever people to measure things that have never been measured before. Because like me, or maybe like him, I want to know how it actually works. And it drives me crazy because you read these stories, whether it's in the Bible or more recent books, like there's a book that I read recently, which just, it didn't blow my mind. It was like a light went on, because I wanted to tell you this. So there is a set of books that was written about in the 1950s by a guy who went and spent some time with people in the Himalayas and Nepal and India. I think it was in the 1920s or the 1919s, actually, the early part of the 1900s, the early part of the 20th century. And these were people, according to what he's written, who could do things that we would call miracles. Lots of them, all the time. It was just normal. And they said, this is just normal, and you can do exactly the same things as we do. And it's not a big deal. You've just got to understand a law. You've just got to understand how this works. And the thing was that the people who were doing this research and traveling and meeting all of these people and living with these people for periods of time wasn't a 5-minute job. Notice they had to hang around with them for a while. They started to be able to do those things, at least while they were with them. So they proved it was possible. And the author who wrote these books, and in case you're wondering what the books are, they are called The Life and Teachings of the Masters of the Far East by Baird T. Spalding, right? That's the name of the books. And there's 6 of them. The first 3 are about the actual adventures they had, and then there's 3 other things that came later. And I read them all, and I've read them more than once, and I will read them again. In fact, I'm reading the first one again. But I read those books, and I thought, this is really cool. And I mean, there's a lot of philosophy in the books as well. But this is really cool, and I get it. But really, I mean, how do you do it? And because of what I've learned from Dr. Dispenza, whom I love and so grateful to, and it's not that I've stopped learning. I don't want you to think that I've moved on from that teaching, because I'm totally immersed in it. And because of what I learned from what I've learned and keep learning from Dr. Joe, when I read those books, like, I can see that I can kind of feel things here, and it's like, I know this should be possible. I know this should be true. But the author had made a decision, obviously, to remove anything that you could say, well, I'm going to go to that place and check out that thing that he talked about there exists, and the Himalayas is a big place, so it's really hard to find things. And people's names were changed, and he did that on purpose. He says right at the beginning of the book, you can decide if this is true or not. And he probably decided to do that because he didn't think in the 1950s that people would, if he said this is true, they'd probably all say, well, this is rubbish. So he left it for people to decide, which was also what the masters that he spent time with did. He said, well, you watch us, you decide. Was it true or not? And so they did, and they did. So I read those books, and I was mystified, and I got inspired, and all of the things that do when you get new information, and I meditated, and some of these principles and ideas went into my meditation, and they enriched my meditation. This is what happens when I get new information. And then recently, I read the book Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda. And he was a guy who was young in the 20s, I think, and he was actually hanging around with Indian saints who did miracles, again, quite routinely. And he documents them. And he documents history, and he went around, got photographs and verified dates and things. So he was actually eyewitness to this stuff, and he did it himself. And again, it wasn't a big deal. It was just, well, you have to know how. And the thing was that I read his book, and I remembered the book about the masters, and I also correlated things that he was describing with experiences that I have had myself in meditation. And it was like, oh my God, this is real. It's actually possible. These things are real. This was only 50, 80 years ago. And this guy was a real guy. Everybody knows about Paramahansa Yogananda because he brought yoga to the East. And what many people don't know is that the fact that he was going to do that was known by his guru, and I think even his guru's guru, before he was born. Okay? So there's weird shit that goes on, and we think it's miraculous, but actually it's just normal when people know how to operate this law. So the point I'm getting to is that those people knew how to manifest stuff. And there's a synthesis going on in my mind, which of course is what I'm trying to share now. And it really is like, when I finished that other piece that I explained to you, I sat at my computer and I made a fresh blank document and I just started brain dumping. I know that's what I have to do anyway. And soon enough, I went down a rabbit hole, which is what I'm going to try and explain to you after I finish this setup piece. But at the same time, in this whole piece, or actually a little bit before, I've connected with the work of physicists, cosmologists, anthropologists, so many disciplines, Nassim Haramein, who is, most often known as a physicist, but he never went to school because he was terribly dyslexic. He never went to college, university. He studied himself. He's autodidact, is what he is. He went to the university libraries or the library, and he just studied and studied and studied for like 20 hours a day. He didn't need much sleep. And he just sucked in all this information, and he saw the connections between all these different disciplines. So anyway, he and his team at the end of last year released a paper which actually explains how 4 different quantum physics theories or theories of physics all fit together, because everyone's been looking for the general theory of relativity and nobody's found it. And he and his team have actually created it. And I started to listen and read and wrap my mind around what he was saying. And it takes a little effort. But, there are interviews and he has pictures and things. And I began to understand about the fundamental nature of the structure of matter in our universe and how things actually work. And when I put all of that together with everything else I've learned, I'm starting to get it. And more importantly, in my meditations, as I'm developing skills in my mind, I'm thinking the same thoughts and feeling the same feelings of, it's not, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this, but, I can change my brain. I can actually change blood flow and energy levels in my brain. I can change how my brain is functioning. I can change the energy that I'm putting out. And oh man, I'm actually healing my body. That's just, it's new, it's different. So I've had healings come to me in my meditation before now, but I didn't know they were happening. This last one that happened, it was very physical. I knew it was happening. I watched it, I observed it, and I also understood how I created it. And since then, because of course my belief in myself has gone up, because I can look back and say, I did that. I now have a greater belief in myself, which is a big deal, actually, for me. I think for anybody to be able to do this. And you only get that by facing all your disbelief and all your doubts and all your, I can't possibly do this. And all. So don't think that just magically happened. I've had to overcome myself a lot to be this much God of me. And I'm only this much God of me. But to be this much God of me, I've had to overcome myself a lot. But I'm starting to be able to, because Nassim, and I'm not going to try and do it today because I don't have time, but he explains the fundamental structure of matter in a way that I can actually grasp, and I'm going to explain it to you. And the point being that I understand now that these little tiny pieces of matter that are resonating, that make up everything, they do respond to you and me. They respond instantly to the frequency that we emit, and we have much more power in that frequency than we think we do once we learn how to work with it. There is a law, there are skills, there is a way to deal with this stuff, and there are ways not to deal with it. And for me, that hyped up thing of I've got to think positive and I can never look at my challenges, or that never worked for me, and I understand better why now, because if I'm fighting to say I'm positive and there's all that going on around the background, well, that's like static on the wire. I've got to be 100% belief in whatever it is that I'm creating. And I'm starting to understand how that works, just a little bit, just a teeny tiny bit. I'm putting the pieces together for myself, and it may only be for myself that I'm starting to understand how it works. But I want to explain that to you. I want to explain my experience and my understanding of how manifestation is actually working in 3D. This is not woo-woo, and it's not, oh, I feel fantastic, but nothing's changed. It's more like I'm changing my emotional baseline, and it really is one belief, one fear, one whatever it is that I overcome at a time. But some of them are so profound that my whole body is different afterwards, and I'm free where before I wasn't. And then, of course, the entire universe actually has to keep up with me. It must. Because there's actually, this body is not me. I'm not inside this body, and I'm not outside this body. I'm right through this body, and I have no boundaries, nor do you. We are as big as the universe, and we're right through it. It's such a huge concept, thing to realize that we're not, the people say, oh, there's the body and then there's the aura. Where does that stop? Checking the time here. It doesn't. We just think that it does. And even if we think that it doesn't, it's like, well, how do I use that? What possible use is that to me? This is what I'm going to try to explain. I don't know how long it's going to take me to do it. I do know that I'm a good thing explainer, and I'm good at breaking complicated things down to make them simple, and esoteric things down to make them relatable. So that's what I'm going to be doing. It's the next big chapter in GodofMe, because who the hell cares about all the philosophy and the feeling good and that person did it and this happened, and that's all true, and it does happen. It really does happen. People do materialize things out of nothing. It happens. I could tell you stories. I don't think I've got time. But the point is, how do I do it? And there are as many ways for people to do it as there are people. But this is me. I'm starting to explain about what I know about how matter actually works, which is not very much, but it's enough that it's inspired me. So maybe it can be useful to you, and that's what I'm going to do. Because we are not these bodies. We are a resonance. We are a consciousness. We are, you might say, like a mandala. You know, those huge patterns that the Buddhist monks, they're very slowly, it's a form of meditation, they pour the coloured sand onto the floor and it's this glorious pattern. But imagine one of those, it's not just a flat pattern on a floor, imagine one of those that is as big as the universe, and it's a unique pattern. That is you. And we are this big, and we are that much a part of everything. And then there's this tiny little thing that happens in this three-dimensional plane that allows a little bit of that enormity to come down and actually have a three-dimensional experience. That's how I perceive myself, you, me, all of us now. This enormous thing that is the size of the universe, a subset of the universe, but intimately entangled. We are entangled with everything. We don't have boundaries. We just don't understand how to use the truth of what we actually are. So we're not our bodies. The bodies just allow us to have an experience. And you know why we do that? So that we can have before and after. Because if you are one with everything, you're one with everything, and nothing is ever going to change, but nothing at all. To have a before and after, you've got to have duality, and so you've got to have an individual and everybody else. And then suddenly you can have an experience of otherness, of separation. You know, and we do it for that. So, anyway, I know I haven't really talked about, well, I feel like I haven't talked about much that's very specific, but that's because I'm just taking the first bites into a really big apple. But I'm quite excited because this is really real to me, and I think it's really relevant. And I have no idea what path we'll take, but I do know what I'm going to be talking about, and it is what I've learned. I'm starting at what I've learned from Nassim Haramein, because it's about the fundamental structure of matter. And for me, understanding that was huge, is huge, because it changes how I interact with everything, especially when I'm in my creative process, when I'm out in the unified field, remembering that I'm that big and remembering that I'm resonance, and I'm a resonance that's creating a hologram in three-dimensional reality. If I change my resonance, my three-dimensional hologram is going to change. And it does. That's the weird thing, which is starting to, like, oh my God, I did that, I did that, I did that. And I know how I did it. They're little teeny tiny things, but I'm still doing them. And they're tangible and real. So that's what I'm going to be working on explaining, and I'm sure I'll tell you stories along the way about what I'm doing and what other people have done. They're my heroes. They inspire me. They show me that it's possible. So I guess I'm here today to say it's possible, and I'm looking forward to unpacking for you what I know about how and why and how we can do it. Big love. Thank you for hanging in there and enjoying this with me. I love to have you share this, whether it's live or on Facebook later or on YouTube. I invite you to check me out on Patreon. Follow me on Patreon to see the pictures that I started creating this morning. And I mean, you know, they'll get up there when they're done. At the moment, it's all just beginning. But there's goodies on Patreon. If you wish to follow me there, it'll be delightful. So until next week, thank you for joining with me. I look forward to seeing you then. Bye-bye.